Good morning. The sitting is open. One announcement based on the conclusions of the advisory committee dealing with harassment complaints concerning members of the European Parliament, and after taking into account the observations of the member concerned, I have decided to impose a penalty on Mr. José Ramón Bauza pursuant to Rule 10.6 and Rule 176 as a result of his behaviour towards his accredited parliamentary assistant, which constituted psychological harassment. The penalty consists of a reprimand. The member concerned has been notified of the decision and has not lodged an internal appeal with the Bureau. Under Rule 177, the penalty is therefore final. In relation to the decisions by several committees to enter into interinstitutional negotiations pursuant to Rule 71, paragraph 1, announced at the opening of the session on Monday, 26th of February, I have received no request for a vote in Parliament by members or a political group or groups reaching at least the medium threshold. The committees may therefore start the negotiations. We now move to this morning's next item on the agenda, which is the joint debate concerning European security and defence, Council and Commission statements, strengthening European defence in a volatile geopolitical landscape, and the report by Mr. McAllister, implementation of the Common Foreign and Security Policy, Annual Report 2023, and the report by Mr. Mixer, implementation of the Common Security and Defence Policy, Annual Report 2023. I'll start by giving the floor for the Council to the State Secretary for Digitisation in charge of administrative simplification, privacy and buildings administration, Mr. Mathieu Michel.
Thank you, Madam President of the European Parliament, Madam President of the European Commission, honourable members of the European Parliament. 2023 was a very challenging year. The international system continues to face multiple and overlapping challenges. We face two wars on our doorstep, while climate, food and energy crises pose threats to global peace and security, hamper global governance and slow down sustainable development. This forces us to fundamentally rethink our Union. Right now, two issues are urgent priorities: Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and the war that has flared up once again in the Middle East. In the current geopolitical context, security and defence must be the top priority of Europeans. 2 years ago, the strategic compass was proposed and launched. At that time, nobody paid a lot of attention. Now the need to strengthen our defence at EU level has become obvious to everybody. Russia's invasion of Ukraine marks a watershed moment in European defence. Within weeks, dogmas that had stood for decades were overturned. First, the European Peace Facility was used to incentivize member states to give more military equipment to Ukraine. Never before had the EU financed the delivery of military equipment to a country at war. So far, the EU and member states have mobilized more than 28 billion of euro of military assistance. Later, the largest military mission in the EU's history was launched to train the Ukrainian army. By the end of this summer, 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers will have been trained on EU soil. The training they receive is what Russia's new recruits often lack. It significantly increases their chances of survival. But the Russian war of aggression has also highlighted the significant weaknesses resulting from 30 years of neglect in defence capacities. The weaknesses exist in terms of material, but also in terms of interoperability. Today, defence budgets are 40% higher than a decade ago, But we still have a long way to go, and we all need to accelerate. We are not going to be able to play a geopolitical role if we are not able to defend ourselves. Defense is a national competence. It is the member states that have armies. We must be able to mobilize our armies to face common threats. We have to make them work together better in order to have more interoperability, more mobility, capacity together, and more coordination. We need to spend better. But spending more does not automatically mean spending better. To get the best results, we need economies of scale. To ramp up production, the European defence industry needs certainty of long-term demand. This idea is at the heart of our ammunition initiative. We need to aggregate member states' demand, procure jointly and support European industry in ramping up their production capacity. Through the European Defence Agency, we have put in place 60 framework contracts to place orders to the European defence industry. We must follow this example in other areas. Together with the European Defence Agency, EU Ministers of Defence have already identified the key capabilities they need, ranging from ground combat capabilities and integrated air and missile defence to underwater warfare capabilities, space services, cyber defence, or other strategic enablers. All this, a stronger EU defence with member states spending more and better together, will also help strengthen NATO. Through the strategic compass, we are also working to make our armies more interoperable and our EU operational engagement more effective. Evacuations such as in Afghanistan and Sudan have shown that EU member states often depend on outside help to protect and evacuate their citizens. We need the capacity to act with partners where possible, but also alone if needed. By 2025, we will have a rapid deployment capacity, allowing us to quickly deploy up to 5,000 troops in response to crisis situations. As part of this work, we conducted last October the first live EU military exercise in Cadiz, in Spain. Interoperability is also key for our CSDP mission. In this more and more volatile world, they are increasingly important to protect European security interests abroad and contribute to global and regional stability. We are already working closely together in the context of our common security and defence policy missions. Since the beginning of this legislative mandate, the EU has launched 7 civilian and military missions, including last week our new maritime security operation, Amidst, in the Red Sea. Through Amidst, Atalanta, and our coordinated maritime presence in the Gulf of Guinea, we are showing that the EU can act decisively when our maritime security is at risk. Other examples of our concrete operational engagement, and not only military, are the civilian missions launched last year in Armenia to contribute to stability along the border with Azerbaijan or in Moldova to strengthen their resilience against hybrid threats. Russia's war against Ukraine has reminded us how critical traditional military capabilities like tanks, artillery, or ammunition remains, but also how much hybrid threats on space, cyber, and critical infrastructure, as well as information manipulation, have changed the threat landscape. In the past 2 years, we have seen progress in building capacities in all of those areas, but we can do more. If we want to be a geopolitical player, we need to have the means, and the means start by having a strong defense capacity and a strong defense industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. State Secretary. And now I give the floor to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
Madam President, Mr. State Secretary, honourable members. In the last years, many European illusions have been shattered. The illusion that peace is permanent, the illusion that economic prosperity might matter more to Putin than destroying a free and democratic Ukraine. The illusion that Europe on its own was doing enough on security, be it economic or military, conventional or cyber. As we look around us, it is clear there is no room for any more illusions. Putin used the peace dividend to prepare for this war. As a result, the world is as dangerous as it has been for generations. Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine is now in its third year and is more entrenched and intense than ever. We are seeing the potency and the dangers of a rising and disturbing league of authoritarians. North Korea is delivering order after order of ammunition shells to Russia. And Iran is providing attack drones, and crucially also the technology behind them, to inflict untold damage on Ukrainian cities and citizens. The continuing war in Gaza and the large-scale destabilization in the Middle East point to an era of insecurity and conflict in the region and beyond. And we are also seeing the continued rise of aggressive economic competition and distortion, which brings with it some very real European security risks. So to put it as bluntly as outgoing President Niinistö of Finland did last month, Europe has to wake up, and I would add urgently. We all know there is so much at stake here, our freedom and our prosperity, and we have to start acting like it. We need to start working on the future of the European security architecture in all of its dimensions and with all of the speed and political will that is required, because the truth is we have not been living with conflict merely since 2022, but for far longer. The threats to our security and prosperity and our way of life come in many different forms, and we all know them. Some of them are obvious, some of them are hazier on the surface, be it tackling political interference, reducing our dangerous dependency, a policy that I've called de-risking, or be it eliminating hostile actors from our critical infrastructure. We Europeans must be on guard. This is not just about defeating bullies on the battlefield, but across all our societies. The good news is we have started a lot of that work already. In fact, the last years have not only served to shatter some European illusions, but they have also shattered many illusions about Europe. That our unity would not hold in the face of a war on our continent, or that our rules and divisions would hold us back in providing massive financial, military and political support. Well, over the last 2 years, Europe has shown and proven that it will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And we have also shown and proven that a more sovereign Europe is not just wishful thinking. And at this point, let me be very clear. European sovereignty will make our partnerships stronger. It will never affect the importance and the need for our NATO alliance. In fact, a more sovereign Europe, in particular on defence, is vital to strengthening NATO. And that is why I am pleased with the news that Sweden will soon become NATO ally, and I want to congratulate Sweden under the leadership of Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson on the historic step for this country. At its core, European sovereignty is about taking responsibility ourselves for what is vital and even existential for us. It is about our ability, but also about our willingness to defend our interests and values ourselves. And this is what leaders agreed with the Versailles Agenda just after the start of the war. To reduce our strategic dependencies in critical areas, like energy, like key technologies, you remember the semiconductors, economic capacities, and, of course, defense. Member states have stepped up. Just last week, the naval mission Amidst was launched to protect against the direct threat to the freedom of navigation that serves as a bedrock of global trade in one of the world's most critical waterways. And member states have stepped up their defense spending too. Their national defense budgets have already risen by 20% from last year. And NATO has just announced that it expects 18 of its members to beat the 2% defense spending target this year. That is up from only 3 members a decade ago. And together we are now spending more jointly on common capacities and projects between Europeans. The European Peace Facility has mobilized 6.1 billion euro to support the Ukrainian armed forces with lethal and non-lethal military equipment and supplies. The European Defence Fund is investing in high-end defence capabilities in critical areas, such as naval, ground or air combat, space-based early warning systems or cyber. And we have taken big steps forward in growing our defence, industrial and manufacturing capacities. In the next weeks, we will announce award decisions under the ASAP programme, and this funding will enable us to roughly double European ammunition production to over 2 million shells a year by the end of 2025. Honourable members, all of this progress shows that Europe has started to grasp the urgency and the scale of the challenge that is ahead of us. But there is a lot more to do, and we need to move fast. The threat of war may not be imminent, but it is not impossible. And the risks of war should not be overblown, but they should be prepared for. And that starts with the urgent need to rebuild, replenish, and modernize member states' armed forces. And in doing so, Europe should strive to develop and manufacture the next generation of battle-winning operational capabilities, and to ensure it has sufficient quantity of material and the technological superiority that we may need in the future. That means turbocharging our defence industrial capacity in the next 5 years. At the heart of this must be a simple principle. Europe must spend more, spend better, spend European. We will put forward some proposals in the next weeks with the first ever European industrial defence strategy. One of the central aims of the strategy and the European Defence Investment Programme that will come with it will be to prioritise defence joint procurement, just as we did it very successfully with the vaccines or, for example, with natural gas. And this will help us reduce fragmentation and increase interoperability. But to do this, we must collectively send a strong signal to industry. And this is why we will look at how to facilitate, for example, off-take agreements. They need security and the knowledge that the products will be taken off. or, for example, advance purchase agreements where we provide guarantees. This would give our defence industry companies very stable orders and, most importantly, predictability in the long run. We will increase support for industrial ramp-up, as we are now doing with the ammunition with ASAP. We will identify European defence projects of common interest to focus efforts and resources where it has the biggest impact and added value. And we will focus on innovation to ensure Europe has that edge in the new technologies, which we see being deployed across the world in different continents. This must be a truly European effort. And that is why I am proud to announce that we will set up an Office for Defence Innovation in Kyiv. This will bring Ukraine ever closer to Europe, and it will enable all member states to draw on Ukraine's battlefield experience and expertise in industrial defence innovation. Honourable members, making this step together on defence will not be easy. It will require bold decisions and political courage, and it will require, above all, a new European defence mindset from institutions to industries to investors. That is why I'm very encouraged by the words of President Calvino that the EIB is ready to do more to contribute to joint projects that boost the European defence industry. And I really call now on member states to endorse this proposal. Defence industry in Europe needs access to capital. And I would like to encourage our public and private lenders to support our defence industry and, in particular, small and medium enterprises. Also in defence, small and medium enterprises are the backbone of our industry. They are the driver of innovation and a critical factor in the single market. And the topic needs undivided attention. And this is why I'm personally supportive of a designated defence commissioner for the next Commission. And beyond that, I would like us to think bigger. It is time to start a conversation about using the windfall profits of frozen Russian assets to jointly purchase military equipment for Ukraine. There could be no stronger symbol and no greater use for that money than to make Ukraine and all of Europe a safer place to live. Honourable members, ultimately, this is about Europe taking responsibility for its own security. The simple truth is, we do not have the luxury of comfort. We do not have the control of elections or decisions in other parts of the world. We simply do not have the time to skirt around the issue. With or without the support of our partners, we cannot let Russia win. And the cost of insecurity, the cost of a Russian victory, is far greater than any saving we could make now. And this is why it is time for Europe to step up. Long live Europe.
Thank you very much. Now we go to the speakers of the political groups, starting with the President of the EPP Group, Manfred Weber.
President Metsola, von der Leyen, Council, dear colleagues, as EPP we are first of all happy to have the debate today, such an upgraded top-level debate about the defence union. EPP was asking for this for a long period of time, and that's why it's good to have it. For us, first of all, I want to underline that the subject itself is not innovative at all. I said it already in my last speech. In 1945, Adenauer, Schuman, de Gasperi started with the defence union. The French parliament rejected. De Gasperi had tears in his eyes after it failed in the French parliament. The idea in 1954 was, after the Second World War, unifying armies, never again war in Europe. What a fascinating idea behind. And we are back to this debate. We are back to this debate. Again, we discuss the subject with the idea, never again war in Europe. But that means today to be strong. And that's why we are so happy to have this debate. The first point from an EPP perspective is the debate about NATO-EU is for us not a debate at all. The NATO is fundamental for us. We also welcome Finland and Sweden joining the NATO. The EPP parties in Finland always were in favour, even when it was unpopular in the country, in favour of joining. Socialists finally also are supporting now joining the NATO from the both countries, so welcome in the club. But that is a good outcome. We have them now among us. And on the long run, we must understand that 330 million Americans will not defend on the long run 440 million Europeans. We have to do it by our own means. That's why it's not in contradiction, it's the same what we are doing here to strengthen NATO with a strong EU pillar. The concrete actions is now to implement the European single market, and there we welcome very much the presentation of Ursula von der Leyen, the ambitions of Ursula von der Leyen. The Americans have one tank, we have 17 different kinds of tanks. The Americans have 30 weapon systems, we have 160 weapon systems. It's so obvious that we are wasting money. We have to buy European, we have to care about our jobs, we have to do common exports rules for the future, to have common industry in defence. We need to coordinate all this. That's why the idea to have a commissioner responsible for doing so is exactly what we need. And on short term, we have to finance it. So the EIB development is a good one, but I want to add also that on the taxonomy rules, we have to rethink them, because currently taxonomy rules are also an obstacle for financing defence goods. That's why we have to make it possible that the private sector is financing this. And listening to the Council speaker, I have to say that we heard so much already about these kind of speeches, that it is national responsibility. My clear demand is stop speaking, please act now on the Council side. We need also joint actions about the areas where we have an obvious European added value. When it is about cyber defence, about a missile defence shield, about a joint mission, for example, in the future of Sub-Sahara, to not hand over the region to Wagner troops or to the Islamist terrorists. That is another point for us, that we have to care about the current state of play on defending Ukraine. Und erlauben Sie mir in Deutsch weiterzumachen.
And if I can continue in German, we note that solidarity is being undermined in Europe at the moment. I'm concerned and disappointed by what we've heard from European leaders. Emmanuel Macron has started a senseless debate on the question of whether French troops should be on the ground in Ukraine. This was a senseless debate, and it's divided Europe and the Western Hemisphere. Secondly, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, has talked about the delivery of Taurus missiles and said that Germany will therefore become a party to the war, which is wrong. And this is something which is only being confirmed by Russian propaganda when they say that part of countries in Europe could become parties to the war. And these are just leading to division, not solidarity and unity in Europe. So I can only say stop. Putin has threatened our lifestyle. Ukraine cannot fall. We must stop Russia. Appeasement won't work, as we learned in the Second World War. And like Ursula von der Leyen, Donald Tusk was very strong. We need people who are willing to lead, show unity, not division, and therefore Putin will only understand strength. I'd quote George Washington.
War is to prepare for it. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Dear Presidents, colleagues, an important debate this one, at an existential moment for Europe and the world. One has to start by saying we did well on responding to yet another existential threat to the world, that was COVID. We were safe and the Europeans recognize it. But the rest of the world accused us of just taking care of the rich people in the West. We did also well when Putin invaded Ukraine. With an extraordinary effort by our High Representative, we were united from the beginning, sanctioning Putin and delivering weapons to Ukraine. Now, yet another war came to our borders, increasing the uncertainty of the times that we live. We can't simply look the other way when 30,000 people died in a few months at the hands of the Israeli army in Gaza. The rest of the world is yet again questioning our moral compass. But it is us that should be questioning what are we doing in these dramatic times. President von der Leyen, if we want to be safer in the world, we have to be a more geopolitical Europe, as you correctly pointed out at times. But the world will not forgive us for our double standards. The world will not partner with us if they feel left behind, just as long as they are not Caucasian or rich. If we want to be more geopolitical, we need to keep our moral compass. And then we have to go geostrategic and start really mobilizing all our instruments. Where are our concrete actions for lasting partnerships with Africa and Latin America? Will we just give up to President Macron's domestic problems and turn our back on the rest of the world? We can't continue to hesitate. We need to go forward, not stall our ambition. If we want to be safe, we need to be stronger, to make ourselves respected in the world. Where are the funds, the actual funds that we need for the strategic autonomy of Europe? A greener Europe will also be a safer Europe for the future. Have you told Mr. Weber, President von der Leyen, have you told him this much? Do you know that the EPP is trying to tear down the green policies that we built, also with the work of the Commission, trading the future of Europe and the planet for just a few thousand votes? A Europe with more opportunities for all. It's also a safer Europe for all. Where are your concrete policies for a more social Europe? Have you forgotten the politics for the people, particularly those that suffer the most here in Europe? The EU also misses proposals to really face the threats of China, or even the aggressive IRA of the US. Not with words and strategies, but with resources for our economy to match the ambition of these programs of particularly the Chinese rivals. A global vision we do need, a strategy we do need, but we also need concrete tools to act. Where are our teeth when some of our natural allies, let alone our opponents, challenge our common values or interests? What did you do in concrete terms to stop Netanyahu's unacceptable actions in Gaza that followed the madness of Hamas? What did you do to actually promote a lasting peace? Why didn't you personally call for an unconditional ceasefire now that millions have their lives threatened in Rafah, Madam President? Guterres and Borrell, they led by example in this conflict. But from you, I am sorry to say, President von der Leyen, it's been silence in action after a serious initial mistake. A safer Europe will be a Europe that projects its strength in the world to promote peace, not war, to promote development, not inequalities. A safer Europe will be able to be more relevant in its own defense, saying yes to NATO, saying yes to its neighbors. But it has to be a Europe based on solidarity and knowing that, as always, an eye for an eye will only turn this world into blindness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marquez. And now the President of the Renew Europe Group, Valérie Hayer.
Bonjour, Madame.
Good morning, President, State Secretary, honourable members. For far too long, we have ignored the signs of turmoil around the world. Increasingly, our values of freedom and democracy are under attack, physically or virtually. Despite these threats, we had become too used to a certain luxury, a luxury that allowed us to turn a blind eye to the harsh realities of geopolitical convulsions. We became accustomed to peace, a real European miracle, but we took it for granted. That peace is essential for our freedoms and our well-being, our prosperity. Honourable members, if we rely on our US allies, as we did to ensure our defence, the ultimate result was that we underinvested in defence capability. Our wake-up call has been brutal. Brutal. 2 years ago, Vladimir Putin brought war back to European soil. The worst atrocities have been committed. Threats now hang over our heads. Honourable members, since 24th of February 2022, the time for naive innocence is past. We support the heroic efforts of Ukraine, and we also need to look at our own security. Our links with our allies are precious. But when we see our geostrategic priorities take different paths, we cannot hesitate any longer. We cannot wake up the day after the US elections without having been prepared. We are Democrats and we refuse to abandon our EU to the aggressors, unlike those whose links with Putin are well known and documented here on the far right and far left of this hemicycle. Do not count on them to defend our continent, their own countries. There is no point attacking our heads of state. They are key. We need to be responsible, show collective responsibility. Otherwise, we are going to play into the hands of our opponents. I have a question for you. Who better than Europe to protect Europe? Honourable members, it is time for action. We need to put an end to unanimity when it comes to European foreign policy. Today, one single government, even one in hock to a foreign power, can undermine the damages of all. We need to also consider new initiatives, for example, setting up European military academies. Our armies need to be fully interoperable. We also need to look at fresh forms of financing for our protection. We need a true single defence market to protect ourselves. It's about the security of each and every one of us. Thank you.
Now, Co-President of the Green Group, Terry Reintke.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen.
Thank you very much, colleagues, President, Minister. Ukraine is fighting for its and our freedom for a democratic, a free Europe. For Ukraine and for our own security in the European Union, we need to get serious about a common security and defence policy. Not just pay it lip service, but do it in actions, because we know that a united Europe can be a secure Europe. Now, unfortunately, some are showing a different path. Instead of it coordinating internally, Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz are leading to confusion. Emmanuel Macron has led was given statements that have led to confusion, and the same thing has been echoed in Germany as well. So we need more supportive words from Paris as well. Olaf Scholz has given half-baked statements on tourists instead of showing full and mature leadership, and that is not good enough, because we've reached a pivotal moment 2 years after the brutal aggression of Russia against Ukraine. We clearly need a strong message from Europe that we support Ukraine, will continue to do so that it can win this war. So what we need is a Franco-German engine driving these efforts, providing strength, not just for the support of Ukraine, but also to provide the right course for security and defence in Europe. The figures show that cooperation in defence policy is more the exclusion, more the exception than the rule, and that's something that urgently needs to change. For years, we haven't achieved the objectives that we have set with regard to joint procurement, with regard to common research and defence, common research and development within the EU. That's not only a strategic error, it's also a very inefficient use of taxpayers' money, and that needs to change as well. not in 15 years, now, for our security, for Ukraine. There's no better gift for Putin than a divided, nationally isolated security policy. And one final thing, dear colleagues. The ideological, dogmatic opposition to investment doesn't make sense, because we need to invest, and the Green Deal is a key element in defending our security and defence, to keep us free of dictators like Vladimir Putin. These investments contribute to social cohesion in our society, and a socially divided EU is not only unjust, it actually constitutes a threat to our democracy. So we cannot show fatigue when it comes to investing in social justice. It's in our hands, colleagues. Will we continue to be divided in the coming years, or will we work together to move forward strong in order to defeat the challenges we face and to defend the future of Europe? I know what I want. Thank you.
Nicola Procaccini.
Give the floor to Nicola Procaccini now for the ECR. Thank you, President. President von der Leyen, we're coming to the end of the life of this Parliament now. It's rather late for this debate. Over the last 5 years in this House, we've been talking about butterflies and electric scooters rather than about European security and defence. A herbivorous superpower for Europe is what some appear to want, and that has had its consequences on the business of the European Commission and therefore of the European Parliament too. We've heard wonderful speeches about the need to ride bicycles in order not to emit CO2. We've been talking about dreams, but in the meantime Europe has continued living in reality, and the reality is a beautiful but dangerous place. We've always been clear in my political group. We've always felt that the EU should not try to do everything, but to do a few very important things.
È sempre stato il nostro messaggio.
Doing less, doing better has always been our message. Common defence of our borders and of European interests is one of the few things that Europe can do, that Europe can do very well. Defence is a question of numbers. And looking across the Atlantic, you don't always find the same interests. Looking at NATO, the Atlantic Alliance is not always exactly the same thing as looking at European interests. So don't be surprised when Trump mocks our green dream. It's not always going to be up to others to make sacrifices on our behalf. But at any rate, looking at a European army, the Italian right has been supporting that idea for 50 years. It was still a red armada for others in this House. But looking at this compared to national armies, yes, there's expense involved, but it is worthwhile. If we can spend less overall and do more, and do better, then that will be proof of what you can do with good sense and realism. Look at Aspides and in the Mediterranean. These are difficult times, and this is the right way to proceed, but they've always been difficult times. A Roman slave who was freed wrote, "It is not easy to defend oneself alone. We have to defend freedom together."
No, now for the ID group, Jean-Paul Garot.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. The European Union is dreaming that it is a superpower in full control of its own defence. This is a direct attack on the sovereignty of our nations. That cannot be shared with the European sovereignty, a pipe dream. Our citizens are not willing to die for Europe. You die for your leader, your values, your nation, not for a European economic community. How do we strengthen Europe against threats? Well, you have a utopic image of a supranational army. That is risible. The European army would ultimately protect US interests. And what about French nuclear sovereignty? We would end up having to share that, and that is unacceptable. President Macron is trying to style himself as a global statesman, and this is ultimately doomed to failure. His warlike statements have convinced me that if the European Union had an army already, they would have been deployed in a mortal conflict between Russia and Ukraine. For a strong Europe, we need above all strong states. So before we create a European army, let's strengthen our own respective armies. They urgently need it.
Group Martin Schödewan, Co-President.
Thank you very much. In listening to our colleagues, Ms von der Leyen as well, you hear the same words again: weapons, armaments, military capacity, battle readiness. I think it's very easy to use these big words, hide behind them, simply to distract from the failure of your own policies. But your capacity to gain control over just one of the current crises is absolutely evident. Social inequality is rocketing. Hunger and poverty have become a daily reality. The climate crisis is ever more acute. Your only idea with migration is to jettison human rights instead of protecting people. And with war and peace, the only thing that can be heard is a shrill demand for more armaments, which just feeds profits to the armaments companies. And even social democratic policies are talking about having a European atomic bomb, and French President Macron wants to send troops into Ukraine. So the simple question to a friend would be, have you gone absolutely crazy? Do you want an armaments race leading to the next catastrophe? You want a negligent, reckless policy, and at the same time you're applying brutal cuts, meaning that people have less social security, less healthcare provision, their schools are falling apart, they've got less money on their accounts, while all of the profits are going to shareholders. You can't be serious. This is a policy that is fuel for the extreme right and a threat to democracy. If you want to solve any of the major challenges that humanity is facing, then you need a fundamental change of political direction, moving towards a strategically independent EU, which of course needs to be able to defend itself, of course, but also naturally follows the principle that diplomacy is a priority, conflict solution, the strengthening of international organization as a precondition for peace. And, even if it's unpopular, mutual disarmament. We want to win the peace, not the war. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schödewan. Now, Kinga Gál, 1 minute.
Dear President, these are dramatic times. Europe needs stability and prosperity. Therefore, we support the common defence policy and the strengthening of the defence industry, all the initiatives that are related to this. And this will be a priority for the Hungarian presidency of the Council. The 2 annual reports are ideologically based. This is lamentable. They should turn back the deterioration of the defence industry. They are attacking the enlargement commissioner, although he should be praised for giving a momentum to enlargement policy. Western Balkans, enlargement towards Western Balkans is a strategic interest for the EU. This is a limitation on the sovereignty of member states. And we cannot accept the repeated political attacks against Hungary. We are against the Russian aggression, and we are helping Ukraine as much as we can, but we are for peace instead of war rhetoric, and instead of supplying weapons, we have to put an end to this war in our neighborhood.
Thank you. Now 4 minutes, Mr. McAllister.
Mr. President, dear Madam President, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, since we adopted our previous report on the implementation of the Common Foreign and Security Policy on the 18th of January last year, the world has changed significantly. While Mr. Putin is relentless in his war of aggression against Ukraine, the horror terrorist attacks launched by Hamas against Israel on the 7th of October have set the Middle East on fire. In our external action, we need to adapt to these new circumstances. For too long, the European Union has been too cautious. We have not proactively defined and defended our interests in the world. This needs to change. I would like to fully underline what our Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has said this morning in this plenary. And it was actually our Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, who recognized this already back in 2019 when she spoke of a geopolitical commission and a European Union that needs to understand the language of power. Listening carefully to all the contributions this morning, one thing is obvious. One logical conclusion can only be a strong defense portfolio. But what actually does that mean concretely? Yes, I would like to see a Commissioner for Security and Defence in the next European Commission. She, or perhaps he, should coordinate all EU and Member States' defence initiatives and ensure that we are stronger by acting together. Yes, I would want to see EU Member States to procure their defence products jointly, to improve the interoperability of our armed forces and to reduce the costs for taxpayers. The EU Defence Industry Reinforcement Act, EDIRPA, was an important starting point, but it is far from enough. Yes, we must help the European defence industry to increase its production capacity to ensure that our armed forces are fully equipped. We must provide Ukraine with whatever it takes to win this war as long as it takes. Also in that regard, we made a first step with the Act in support of ammunition production, but we urgently, colleagues, need to go further with the future European Defence Investment Programme and by establishing a well-funded Ukraine Assistance Fund under the European Peace Facility. Ultimately, it is about further establishing a single market for defence. The long-term goal, dear colleagues, is, of course, to develop a true European Defence Union, a fully fledged European Defence Union. All our activities need to be closely coordinated with NATO, with our transatlantic partners, the Americans, the Canadians, the British. Let us remain transatlantic and at the same time become more European. That is the way forward. And I would once again like to address our Commission President, because since 2019, dear Ursula von der Leyen, you have taken the right approach. You are strengthening Europe's global footprint and supporting the principles that inspired our own creation, development and enlargement. Since we have discussed my own report extensively in AFET, I will not refer to my own report. I would just like to thank all colleagues involved, especially the shadow rapporteurs, the involved staff members, and also the team of the High Representative Vice President for the constructive and fruitful cooperation. Since this will be the final report on the implementation of our common foreign and security policy in this legislature, hopefully the next Commission and the next High Representative are invited to use this year's CFSP report as a guide for their priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Now, Mr. Mixer for 5 minutes.
President of the Commission, colleagues, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has made many of us reassess our previously held convictions and beliefs about European security needs. What is more, it has exposed vulnerabilities caused by decades of underinvestment in defence and security, both in individual member states as well as at the European Union level. And let me say that perhaps unlike in Finland or Estonia, the conservatives in some larger countries were also complicit in this strategic naivety. Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine must not succeed. It is our moral duty to support the fight for survival of a sovereign democratic European nation. But we have to understand that Ukraine's defeat would also be devastating for EU security and present a mortal threat to the rules-based international order as we know it. Since Putin escalated his war over 2 years ago, the EU has taken many unprecedented steps. The use of European Peace Facility to reimburse member states for equipment donated to Ukraine and the initiative to ramp up production of ammunition and missiles are steps in the right direction. But I am sure that the history books will not judge us based on what we did or spent or what we said in this noble chamber, but on whether we actually managed to help Ukraine win the war. So we need to do more and do it now. It's a matter of utmost urgency because while we are talking, Russia is making gains on ground that will be very difficult and costly to reverse later. We know that Russia, Putin's Russia presents not only a threat limited to the indirect implications of the Ukraine war, there is and will be for the foreseeable future a direct military threat from Russia to EU member states' territories and people. In order to provide credible deterrence against the threat, or if necessary defend our continent, we will need to spend more on defence. It's true that more member states are spending 2% of their GDP on defence than did so 10 years ago, but we know that several larger member states still fall short of that important threshold. Also, while we have launched on the EU level important initiatives such as EDF, EDIRPA and ASEP to boost joint research and innovation, promote joint procurement and address critical capability shortfalls, it is imperative that we also put additional money on the table. It is impossible to use the same money twice, and cannibalizing the budgets of existing programs to finance newer ones is not going to be sustainable. On the defence industrial level, I think it's important that we understand that this new security reality will be with us for the foreseeable future. So our industries must have confidence that the orders from governments will not stop at the moment the arms fall silent in Ukraine. On Europe's strategic autonomy, obviously, it will not be unlimited. It must always be our first choice to act together with our friends and allies. It would be a grave mistake to brush our allies aside just for the sake of going alone. Let me recall the words of NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, who recently described the calls for creating a European nuclear deterrent without the US as unhelpful. But at the same time, we cannot fully ignore the uncomfortable truth that Donald Trump may return to the White House next year. Moreover, there is also far less of a consensus on Capitol Hill when it comes to America's global security responsibilities than just a few years ago. We cannot completely rule out America's turn towards greater isolationism, and this possibility underscores the need to build a militarily stronger and more capable Europe. Finally, while we need to be ready to go alone if necessary and build alliances whenever possible, it is clear that beyond collaborating with our most immediate allies and fellow democracies, we are only going to prevail if we manage to form larger coalitions and convince the rest of the world that our cause is just. Immediately after the beginning of Putin's full-scale war, we managed to pull together a coalition of more than 140 countries in the UN Security Council, UN General Assembly. Today, after months of ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, recreating such a coalition would be very difficult. I'm convinced that every one of us condemns the horrific terror attacks of Hamas and demands the immediate release of all the hostages. A vast majority of us are committed to a two-state solution that provides security for Israel and delivers on the legitimate aspirations of Palestinian people. If it is so, we need to do more. We need to do something very tangible in order to end this unnecessary suffering of millions of displaced and starving people. Only by doing that, it's also a moral obligation, but only by doing that we can convince the rest of the world that we are really committed to maintaining and strengthening the rules-based international order. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague Mixer. I took notice that Mr. Danjean will today have his last speech in the House, and I want to take the opportunity to thank you for the contributions you did and for the service you did. And I think your seriousness and the reliability with which you have done that service is the fundament that you are highly esteemed in the whole House across the benches. Thank you, Mr. Danjean.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Madam President, State Secretary, it's never too late to wake up. The Russian war in Ukraine and speculation about a possible faltering of the US ally, something that could have been seen not just 2 years ago, but 10 years ago. We have now seen some action, but too little, too late. And I refer you to the debate that we had 2 years ago, before and after the Versailles summit, with all sorts of wonderful promises being made, but rather slow to be delivered. We can't continue with promises. We can't waste time and energy in divisive debates. We need to mobilize globally around what we can all rally around: the absolute priority of producing and delivering military material and equipment and arms to and this is true both for the French President, German Chancellor. We have to recognize that there are no categories of producer, not many categories. There's one category of producer, one category of purchaser, and we cannot ask the Commission to produce itself, but to facilitate the connection between private companies and states to ensure that everything flows as smoothly as possible. And as Manfred has reminded us, and I stress, it is imperative that we jettison all ambiguity about the constraints on public and private financing for the defence industry. Whether it's environmental or social taxonomy, the taxonomy rules are creating too much uncertainty for those who would be willing to get involved but are concerned about imprecise or contradictory rules. Member States maintain the major responsibility here. They cannot evade that. They're the ones making the orders, purchases and delivering. So the European Peace Facility needs to see some changes to the EIB, to whether countries are grouping together or doing it individually. They need to act quickly because we need to get those purchases in a war economy.
Thank you very much, colleague Danjean. And I give the floor to my colleague Reuten.
Thank you, President. Commission President, Council, honourable members, European security is under threat, firstly through Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. It must be clear where we stand side by side with Ukraine, because Ukraine defends our democracy and security. We need to supply Ukraine with what it needs to win. We're not currently doing that, and you share responsibility. You both and all countries that are not doing enough need to pledge to do better. This is our joint responsibility, our shared task. We cannot hesitate over ammunition supplies and other equipment. Putin is also a threat because we see his friends in Europe, those that allow the EU to be held hostage through Orban. Commission President, you talk to President Vucic, and We hear from Commissioner Várhelyi and his support for Vučić. All those cases undermine our values. We cannot allow rule of law and democracy to be undermined. Our credibility is also tainted by our positions on situations outside the EU. So we can be disappointed that it took you 2 weeks to speak up about the victims in Gaza, the innocent victims in Gaza, and place them on an equal footing with the victims of the atrocities of the terrorist attack. You know that we need to do better. But let me finish up on a positive note. Mrs. von der Leyen, I would like to thank you for your commitment to Ukraine. Do not yield an inch there. The Parliament has shown and called for effective decision-making for Europe and for our values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Reuten. We now have Member Asmani.
Well, dear President, dear colleagues, I start by paying respect for the Ukrainian people, who continue to fight for our common freedoms. Colleagues, all Ukrainians ask for is weapons. They need to defend their country. Ukraine is losing ground because they don't have them. No one can say when or where Russia's invasion will end. But we know that any victory for Russia is a blow to European security. The less we do now, the higher cost later. We must produce through the European defence industry, but this will take time. In the short term, what Ukraine needs must be jointly procured worldwide. And the Commission should take emergency measures to remove all barriers and stimulate investment in the European defence industry. Now is the time to do what's necessary to enhance our European security. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 1.5 minutes for Member Bütikofer.
Vice President, President von der Leyen, Minister, colleagues. It's good to have this debate. It's good to have broad unity in this House. But looking at the crisis which we are confronted with regarding European security, what is it worth to agree on a CFSP report if we don't have the national leaders that we would need to turn plans into action? I applaud your speech, President von der Leyen, but other people elected to lead Europe are failing her. Let's just look at President Macron and Chancellor Scholz. Sensing that the helpful leadership of President Biden is waning, they're presently at each other's throats, belittling, undercutting, and insulting each other. While one of them is a hero of grandiose statements without real substance, the other, whose party is still partly an appeasement party, hides his timidity behind a play with alternative facts ad nauseum. What about other big EU countries? Where's Italy, Europe's historical mother, barely visible? Where's proud Spain? Her leader, when he spoke to us here, had only empty words and no interest. Some leadership comes from countries in the EU's north and east. The proposal from Estonia of 0.25% of GDP going into defense, that's a leadership proposal. I think we have to rally citizens when leaders fail. So let's form a phalanx of parliaments in order to turn this crisis into a step forward. Hic Rhodus, hic salta.
Thank you very much, Member Bütikofer. We now have Member Weimers.
And
Russia and Belarus weaponize migrants against Europe's frontier. Yet the resolve of Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland holds strong. Border barriers work. Unfortunately, the Commission believes physical barriers don't efficiently improve border management and refuses to fund them. That's a security problem. They believe EU funds are better spent, I'm not joking, on circus workshops to integrate military-aged male migrants and empty parties in the metaverse. Every year, hundreds of thousands of migrants are told to return. Everybody knows it, they don't, because their countries won't even take them back. Greece wants sanctions against those countries, an EU deportation mechanism. We should support them. It should be in this report, and use the sanctions to pay for physical border barriers. The Commission should immediately inform uncooperative countries that for every migrant they refuse, 20,000 euros will be deducted from the EU funds they receive. And for every weaponized illegal migrant entering Europe, it'll cost them 200,000 euros. Some of you talk about Fortress Europe like it's a bad thing. I say fund that wall and make Morocco, Turkey, Syria, and Pakistan pay for it. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, colleague Weimers. We have 40 more speakers. Practically all of them have 1 minute. So if everybody goes over their minute, then I'll have to recommend that the next president in this seat will have to shorten the catch the eye. A number of group presidents have spoken, but we're going to have to be strict if colleagues do not show discipline. And I give the floor to colleague Vistisen. Today, you have to be ashamed to be Danish, having a government and a prime minister which is trying to distract Danes from the real intentions from European defence policy. But here we can be honest. We are talking about the creation of a European army, an attack on countries' right to veto defence and security policy. That we are talking about a unified European policy, which can only lead to greater instability in Europe, in the continent. We need to be at least honest about the fact that that is the ambition. We have a strange debate in Denmark, where there's a distinction between the ambition here, Europe becoming a super-state, with its own security and defence policy, foreign policy, while at the same time there's praise for the ideal of a nation-state being autonomous. So I think we need to be consistent.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Vistisen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vistisen. 1.5 minutes, our colleague Demirel.
Thank you, President. Mrs. von der Leyen has just said that Europe needs to wake up, and means by that that Europe must build up its armaments, be battle ready. That is the message to people around Europe, that they should wake up. Now, I can recall scenes of young men in the past who enthusiastically left to join the war and then just a few years later returned from battlefields crippled. That is what building up weapons means. Arming our countries in war, that is what it means. It is barbaric. Since Russia's attack on Ukraine, that is all we hear. More and more weapons. more, faster, bigger guns. What does that all mean? Well, Mr. Macron yesterday tried to play a New Age Napoleon and said that we should have boots on the ground in Ukraine. What would that mean? Is that preparing some sort of world war? Honourable members, war is the very opposite of peace. People in Europe dream of social peace and security. So, people of Europe, we need to stand up against the warmongers. We need a strong peace movement. It's about our future and the future of our children.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Demirel.
Thank you very much, colleague Demirel. We now have colleague Kyungyosi.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, the EU is facing the greatest security challenge since World War II. While NATO remains the guarantee of its security, Europe has to demonstrate it can defend its own people, culture and values on its own if necessary. A precondition for that is the creation of the legal framework for a European army, both at the level of the EU and the individual member states, followed by a harmonized and integrated defense industry, common military programs and projects. I would suggest that in its next term, the Commission sets common European defence as a top priority and creates two major portfolios headed by a commissioner each. And I'm very glad that Ursula von der Leyen mentioned the first one in her statement. One responsible for the establishment of a common army, air force and navy, and another, which is equally important, for harmonizing intelligence, the activity of the national secret services. This is critical in European defense, given the recent level of Russian interference, targeted killings, hacking, and cyber attacks on European territory. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Gyöngyös.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kyungyosi. We have now our colleague Untivnice.
To Sweden, now we will be much stronger together, but we must realize that the war started by Russia is not a short-term crisis. Putin started this war thinking that democracies in general would not be able to withstand it. But we must be able to withstand. We need a clear plan to help Ukraine to win. We need a consensus that each state allocates at least 0.25% of GDP to the victory of Ukraine. This should be the foundation of a real EU defense union. On army, for me, an example of someone who is serious in the European Union about security is the army of Finland. Many EU countries have gotten used to comfort and prosperity, and we have unprepared societies. We must consider returning to conscription and training of young people. Don't give up Europe.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much, colleague Untivnice. And we now have our colleague Pitcher.
Back in 2016, I had the honor of working on a report of this House on the European Defence Union, when the phrase itself raised many concerns. Unfortunately, the time has proven us right. Even though the geopolitical challenges in this mandate led to several positive steps in the field of common defence, the European Union should be more proactive and less reactive. Common foreign, security and defence policies cannot remain the weakest links of our integrations. Institutional reforms that will increase our cohesion and coherence are absolutely needed. Still, they must be based on a clear assessment of Europe's needs rather than being used as a political power tool. Only a strategically autonomous European Union can be best guarantor of peace on our continent and the best partner to our allies in the NATO. For the EU, it's high time to go the extra mile for the sake of its own security and relevance. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Pizzula.
Thank you very much, colleague Pikula. And we now have our colleague Votmans.
Goedemorgen, meneer de Voorzitter. Good morning, President, honourable members. Europe must wake up and stand up for security and defence. I cannot put it better. We need to spend more, spend collectively, spend more effectively. We need a true European defence industry. Absolutely, that is necessary. Commissioner Breton has a plan for $1 billion shells to be produced within a year. Unfortunately, we did not even reach half that target. And we're going to have to buy in from elsewhere, South Africa, South Korea. That is the current state of play of the European Defence Union. Quite honestly, what is the current state of play after 2 years of war? Do we have a white paper on European defence? What about the relationship between the EU and NATO? We need to move away from unanimity.
We need one Minister for Foreign Affairs. We need, colleagues, a real European army. We need it for Europe. We need it for our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, Jorge Sola, a small announcement. We are already lacking behind in time, so I just really would like to warn you that I have to be very strict on time. So please respect it, otherwise I have to stop you. Please.
Gracias, Presidenta. La creación de una política propia.
Thank you, President. Having our own defence policy has always been a key part of European integration. The Russian invasion of Ukraine was perhaps the turning point when we realised we needed a paradigm shift for security and defence. Now we're rethinking many of the foundations that have given us relative prosperity for some time, because we were forced to, not because we chose to. So in terms of strategic autonomy, soft power may no longer be enough. If we want more strategic autonomy, we need more responsibility. And the key to having an EU defence policy is better, more integrated and efficient use of our own capacity. The defence industry is rather concerned about the fact that the stress is being placed on increasing expenditure and state intervention rather than overcoming obsolete national models and including other dimensions such as social justice, welfare and the human dimension.
Our next speaker, Anna Fotyga, please.
The accession of Sweden is a triumph of NATO, but also a triumph of unanimity, adding to our common security and building, even in difficulty, unity of the collective West. Unity achieved in respect to opinions of even the smallest nations, in particular those having long tradition of fighting for freedom and independence. That I address to our partners and future allies, in particular to Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. My concerns are tomorrow to become yours. All our thoughts and efforts should be to help you to join the collective West as soon as possible, and Ukraine to defeat Russia with our help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jaak Madison.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues. First of all, unfortunately, Ms. von der Leyen has left. But we have to understand, of course, when we talk about the common security and defence policy in the EU, that the strong policy can be only if we have strong member states who are spending enough for defence and who are really realising the world where we're living. I was just checking the numbers before this debate. The current situation has been that Monsieur Macron is very big with the words, with very nice words, but the fact is that the French has given to Ukraine only specifically military aid, only for about 600 million euros. And from the GDP, it has been only 0.067% has been the aid to Ukraine. When our Spanish colleagues were saying also very beautiful words about the common security policy and how to help Ukraine against Russia, that Spain has spent only 0.072% of the GDP to help Ukraine, and their all expenses for defense in Spain are only 1.3% of the GDP, so it's pretty far away from the target 2%. So I think we have to finish the stories about the common beautiful policy until if we don't spend enough for our own.
Our next speaker on the speakers list is Mick Wallace, please.
There are 18 condemnations in the Common Security and Defence Policy Annual Report. Not one of them is directed at Israel. Yet, unlike Israel, none of the 11 countries condemned are carrying out a genocide right now. The report emphasises full support for Israel and for Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law. I'd like the rapporteur of the report to please point out what system of law he is appealing to, because nowhere in international law does it allow for a state to claim the right of self-defence against a threat that emanates from a territory it occupies, from a territory that is kept under belligerent occupation. Israel is a foreign nation illegally occupying Palestine. The Palestinians are the ones with the right to self-defence, not the Israelis. This Parliament makes a mockery of the notion of international law, of human rights. You are twisting international law to justify a genocide, and this then accuse everyone else of human rights abuses. This place is losing the plot.
Our next speaker is Kostas Papadakis, please.
Η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση μαζί με ΝΑΤΟ.
The EU, along with the NATO and the United States, is in the forefront of the imperialist war in Ukraine against Russia. It is helping the oppressor state of Israel. Billions are being given for shells, for AI, and we are preparing to send new NATO troops, as we heard from Mr. Macron, and you are now preparing a defense commissioner. We have the Operation Aspides, the headquarters in Larissa, as well as a Greek frigate that has been sent to the Red Sea. And that is being done by all the political parties in Greece. We need to stop the Aspides operation and bring back the Greek frigate. The people have to fight against the EU and the governments and against the imperialist wars.
Thank you. I will give the floor now to Michael Gahler.
Thank you very much, colleagues. President, on Ukraine, I said yesterday what needs to be said. I welcome that there is movement to enlarge the scope of the activities of the European Investment Bank to defence. That will hopefully also end the hesitance of private banks to engage in defence-related activities. I welcome the announcement of the Commission President that she intends to install a Defence Union Commissioner in the new Commission. And I would like to see it as an ambitious approach. As a Commissioner, this Duke should be assigned all defence-related EU actions within the remit of the European Commission, and in particular on defence research, the support for the industrial base, military mobility, the procurement and transfer directives, resilience, defence and training. All Commission actions should be encompassed in a single multi-annual defence union instrument which the Duke oversees. The Duke should be assigned by the Council the role of the EU Special Representative for the Defence Union. In that role, he should in particular oversee the EDA and PESCO, military staff, military committee, military missions and operations, and should be responsible for the relationship with NATO, and should be assigned the responsibility to inform the European Council about the readiness of the EU to move to a common defence. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Helene Fritzon.
Fru talman, jag vill rikta ett stöd.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President of the Commission and others, I'd like to thank you for your support for Swedish NATO membership. The action by Russia is a threat to the entire continent, and we need to provide military, economic and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Ukraine needs to strengthen and stockpiled so that it can fight on the fronts. For that reason, we will need to increase our military support to Ukraine. This is urgent. We need to give more, purchase more, produce more. We also need to be more united in order to do this, and we cannot let the far right divide us in Europe. We need to provide full support to Ukraine now.
Our next speaker is Petras Austravicius, please.
Madam Chair, Council Representative, Commissioner, dear colleagues, the war in Ukraine, Russia's military aggression against Ukraine require an urgent and strong EU capacity to respond adequately to the situation. Limited defence budgets of member states, insufficient defence industrial capacity, and slow collective EU action are the main reasons for the EU's insufficient response towards war on our continent. Colleagues, the European Commission must establish a kind of the war cabinet, now and fully operational. It must consist of the President of the Commission and several key commissioners responsible for finance, defence industry and common security and defence policy. Secondly, decisions on a compulsory contribution from member states to military support for Ukraine must be taken. A common level of support from national budgets is essential. Certain derogations can be provided to neutral ones. And thirdly, the EU must use the instrument of European bonds to finance long-term defence and production capabilities, which must form the basis for the future creation of European Defence Union.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Chair. I will give the floor right now to Ville Niinistö, please.
Madam President, coming from the EU country that has the longest border with Russia, that is Finland, I cannot emphasize too much the need for us to move from words to operational strength in security and defence in Europe. It is important that we realise that we have to urgently put the focus on conventional weapons for Ukraine and our own defence readiness in making European cooperation the rule for armed forces and defence industries. The most urgent task is to realise that Russia is in war economy. Russia's war policies will not stop if we do not support Ukraine enough to force them to do that. Russia has increased, by the accounts of Bank of Finland, 35% the production of war-related industries from pre-war period in 2002. That means that they will continue as long as they can. So it's not enough for us to support Ukraine as long as they need. We need to support them as much and as fast as they need, and that means strengthening European defence and security cooperation and put its focus on quality and operational strength. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Alexander Vondra.
Well, the most pressing challenge of our time is to contain Russia's aggression and to provide immediate, more military help to Ukraine. We do not need more empty promises, but concrete deeds. We must deliver more guns. At home, we do not need new uniforms. We do not need to build a European army to compete with NATO, and we do not need a never-ending debate about extending the QMVs. But we urgently need to generate more resources for our defences, and we terribly need to modernise our obsolete armed forces. It's the way to make Europe stronger, in stronger NATO, to contain Russia and deter it. And the entry of Sweden into NATO is certainly a great move in the right direction.
Thank you. Francesca Donato, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, it is more urgent than ever today for us to oppose Macron's proposal that EU soldiers be sent to Ukraine. It's a crazy idea, and it would no doubt lead to a bellicose escalation with disastrous consequences for the whole of Europe. Europe's security policy needs to be within a defence framework based on strategic cooperation between member states of the European Union. Every military aspect must continue in the context of NATO, an alliance which has given us peace and security in Europe since the post-war period until today. At the same time, we should promote a negotiating table between Russia and Ukraine to achieve a peaceful, long-lasting solution to the ongoing conflict. Diplomacy plus deterrence through the transatlantic alliance are the only true ways to overcome international conflicts and to ensure peace on our continent. So I ask you all to think about the consequences of our possible actions and act together to achieve stability, security and peace in Europe, not forgetting that defending security and human lives should always be at the heart of our concern.
Floor right now to Antonio Lopez Isturiz White.
Our Ukrainian friends are fighting a war for us. Once again, others are fighting our wars for us. We must face reality. This is no longer sustainable. Europe needs to be able to protect itself. This is a serious debate that will define our future capacity to protect our democratic societies and our international liberal order as we know it. It requires vision, leadership and responsibility. I am happy to see that this debate is gaining more momentum and that the Commission, led by President von der Leyen, is doing all it can to provide us with more tools to keep strengthening our defence capabilities. Much still to be done. More commitment from our Member States, especially from my country, Spain. In any case, I am convinced that this debate is evolving and that in her second mandate as President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, alongside with this Parliament, will be able to consolidate a European defence policy which will increase our strategic autonomy, bring our European project to the next level and be a real sign to Putin, Xi Jinping and Iranian ayatollahs and all those threatening Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Jens Geier.
Thank you, President, Vice President, Council Representative, honourable members. Mere arms, building up capabilities, cooperation across the defence industry, ensuring that Ukraine is battle-ready to fight against imperialist Russia. That is all good and correct. We need to avoid division in societies, energy supplies. We have to fight climate change. That costs money. Ensuring children do not live in poverty, investing in innovation, infrastructure, that all costs money. We need investment and we will need loans. We need to respond to all these needs. The EU and member states must respond to all these needs without debt breaks and without austerity. Thank you.
Nathalie Loiseau.
Notre continent est aujourd'hui.
Our continent is currently in turmoil. One man, Putin, made a choice. He wanted Ukraine to capitulate and bring it to its knees. The US will be making a choice in November, and it may make an isolationist, funereal choice. We have our own choice. If the US consequences for our security, or do we opt for true European defence? So it's not a shortage of ideas or initiatives that we're faced with, and I was pleased to see the Paris conference to strengthen support for Ukraine. What we're lacking, in fact, is financing for arms production to send Putin back and dissuade him from attacking us. Having a common approach to defence, investing in it, is something that will require a mandate. We should go for that. If we want peace, we need to build a European defence union which goes beyond words to action as soon as possible.
Our next speaker is Harald Wilimski.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to talk about Europe's defence strategy here. The question to ask is, if you want war, then send weapons. If you want peace, then send diplomats. And I think that what we're discussing here is pushing us towards, or at least coaxing us towards, a war situation. We're having a discussion about sending EU troops. I remember discussions on the absurd question of giving the EU nuclear weapons. I'd recall the absurd situation of spending €2 billion, which we would need for investment in the Austrian army. Austria is a neutral country, and we needed to speak for peace, and that is better than the saber rattling that we've been hearing here. Thank you.
No shouting in, please. Calm. Our next speaker is Marcel de Graaf. And I would like, before you start to speak, announce that the list for applying for the catch the eye procedure is closed now. Please.
Voorzitter.
President, the EU ambition to play a global role is pure propaganda. We are a composition of different countries and cultures now facing deindustrialization, mass migration, and we're seeing our own food security undermined. We're becoming a third world country, a vassal to the US. The war with Russia has been lost in economic and political terms. This week, we heard a European leader talk about boots on the ground in Ukraine. Those are our children, our farmers, our parents. They are losing out in a bid to make billions in the armaments industry. There is only one way to ensure security, that is to build peace, to respect, to build and negotiate in respect. Thank you.
Tom van den Kendelare.
Mevrouw de voorzitter.
President, Vice President, State Secretary, honourable members. To strengthen our defence, first and foremost, we need to quickly build up effective defence capabilities, and that means we need a robust industry with opportunities for all. We look forward to the new EDIS strategic framework, and we look forward to working with the Commission on this. But let us be honest with citizens. The requisite budgets and support in society will take some convincing and resolve, particularly in the light of war in Ukraine. Honourable members, now when it comes to strengthening our defence, it's about more than industry. We need to look at the budgetary commitments made in the NATO framework, and we need to ensure compliance with those commitments. Belgium needs to do so, and this will have an impact on our citizens. So we urgently need debate in society about the need and cost for security. Thank you.
Speaker is Javi Lopez.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, President. The geopolitical panorama has shifted hugely in the last few years. It's the end of innocence, a strategic wake-up call for Europe. We've seen the security architecture of Europe destroyed by the Russian aggression in Ukraine. If Trump goes back into the White House, then our dependence on the transatlantic link for security will be affected too. We'll have to stop outsourcing our security policy. Over the last few years, we've contributed to strengthening the European defence industry with EDIPA, joint procurement, and we've increased munitions and rapid deployment. We have given a mature response in terms of our support for Ukraine, with unprecedented sanctions and humanitarian assistance too. But it's still not enough. We need to modernise, provide more materiel. We need more European cooperation, and we need to develop the European industry much more too, to be a credible, autonomous geopolitical player in the world.
And now I give the floor to Bart Groothuis.
Thank you, Chair. Dank u. Dames en heren.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here as a transatlantic supporter of the transatlantic alliance, someone who has supported that alliance, that work with the US. That is why Russia has not dared to attack NATO countries, but the US is moving away from us. We know that there are many weapons that are too expensive for us to develop, and we've allowed the US to step in here. We therefore need to develop and buy in these systems in Europe. We need a defence fund worth 100 billion. That is vitally necessary. We also need to look at the European pillar within NATO. We need a European Defence Council, bringing together countries like Norway, the UK, Turkey. We need to start work on this now.
I'll give the floor now to Paolo Rangel.
Thank you, Chair, Minister, Vice President. Primeiro queria saudar
I wanted to start by welcoming Sweden to NATO. That's a strategic, fundamental step for EU transatlantic relations. Putin's Russia invading Ukraine created an existential threat to Europe, to peace around the world. And for that reason, we need a European defence pillar within NATO, yes, which is not necessarily a European army, which is strengthening NATO and which works with the support of EU members to be better organised, and I include Portugal within that too. There are risks of being exposed to the conflict if we send our own troops. We've heard all sorts of ambiguous comments, but we need to be very clear that there are two anti-NATO parties in Portugal. Such a shame to hear Pedro Marques criticising NATO. We need NATO.
Curso que não falou sobre política externa nem defesa tenham vindo a partidos.
Our next speaker, I just ask you to finish your inner debates. And also, when you're speaking longer, you take speaking time from Catch the Eye speakers, so you should be sorry for that. I give the floor to Nikos Papandreou, please.
Thank you, Chair, colleagues. I hear the calls for peace from one of the colleagues and negotiations, but the people we're talking about do not listen to negotiations. And perhaps if we are a third world country, it's because we do not have a strong defense policy. Something happened recently, and that is called Ukraine. Did we shake our paralysis? Did we wake up for a new voice? Are we changing, building a new Europe? Yes. In that distant and oh so close Ukraine, we show that when we want, we can support our ideals. However, the world still doubts us. They doubt us because of our response or absence of response to the destruction of Palestine, the Kurds in Syria, Armenia and Central Africa. And if Trump wins, as Javi Lopez said, we need to have our own defense policy because the umbrella of protection will be full of holes. At some point, we have to give our citizens the sense that Europe can protect its own borders from aggressors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fabio Massimo Castaldo is our next speaker, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, we want to be the architects of our own fate. Otherwise, it's other superpowers who will take the decisions for us. Enough ambiguity, enough absurd lethargy, which is what we've seen over the last few years. We need a European army. The strategic compass has been overtaken by events in Ukraine. We need rapid intervention, 50 to 60,000, not the 5,000 or 6,000 that we're currently talking about. We need to intervene in cyberspace, emerging areas for conflict, not only in conventional conflict. We need strengthened cooperation between states. We need proper military cooperation with a European general, with one unit to coordinate all of our missions and all of our operations. We can't do this through unanimity. We need qualified majority voting as soon as possible. That's what we need in order to defend Ukraine and to defend Europe. It is a time for courage, seriousness. It is a time for action.
Finishing now. So our next speaker is Sheljana Zovko, please.
Zahvaljujem predsjedateljice. Prije svega želim da...
Thank you. And I'd like to congratulate David McAllister for an excellent report on all aspects of our security and defence policy in the previous year. The war in Ukraine, the pogrom against the Jews, the war in the Middle East, the political tensions in the Pacific and the Balkans, all of these are challenges for the stability of Europe. I'd like to thank the Rapporteur for adding elements about the importance of stability in the Balkans and the division of powers in that area. It was as important now as the agreement was in Ireland at the time. The Dayton Agreement and the involvement of international institutions has been important, and recently we've had a report on the international security policy which has called for an end to conflict.
Milan Mon.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. It's the third year of war now starting. Ukraine's military position has deteriorated. We need to continue modernizing our own defense capacity, and we need to assist the Ukrainian army. The European Commission is already taking action with the European Defence Fund and support for munitions, EDIPA for common procurement, and other initiatives which have been announced. A Commissioner for Defence could be appropriate, but I also think Council should have a Council of Ministers of Defence too. The Russian threat is brutal and very severe, but there are other dangers. Look at the Middle East. We didn't pay sufficient attention over the last few years there. The Sahel has direct consequences on our borders too. NATO is vital, but as Europeans, we need to take more responsibility for our own defence too and increase our own capacity. We cannot depend exclusively on the US. Also, we don't know who will be in the White House within a few months, do we? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to Krzysztof Brejsta, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Europa stoi dzisiaj przed wyzwaniem.
Europe is now facing a challenge that it has not been facing since the end of the Second World War. A real threat to Europe and its safety. It is Putin's Russia which attacked Ukraine. We, Poles, many times throughout our history felt the consequences of Russia's imperialism. We feel information war and economic war right now. Only the EU as a strong, effective community, but defense community, only such an EU can face threats from Russia. Our Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said recently that it is time for the politicians to wake up and for the European societies to wake up, because the world is trembling. As never before, We need to wake up today. We need the European community within defense, and now is the time to build together safe and secure Europe, strong Europe, able to defend its values, peace, democracy, not only for now and for us, but also for future generations.
And thanks to all for their contributions. We come right now to the list of speakers for the Catch the Eye procedure, and I can assure you we have really many, many requests. I will try to take as many as the time allows us, and just take members who have been present during debates, as we had so many requests. I will start with Andrius Kubilius, please.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, planning future of our defence and security, we need to get rid of the illusion that our security can be built only on our fears. Now, with Russian war against Ukraine, we are lost in the crossroads of our fears. We rightly fear what will happen with our security if Russia will win in Ukraine. But at the same time, we fear that chaos will happen in Russia if Russia will be defeated. We fear long-term war in Ukraine, that we shall become tired of such a war. And we fear to give Ukraine enough weapons for the victory in the nearest future, because we are afraid that Putin will escalate. President Roosevelt once prudently have said, "Only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Let's stop our fears and let's declare. Putin needs to be defeated, and he will be defeated. And we shall invest into Putin's defeat. That will open the doors for positive transformations in Russia. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Maria Crapini.
Mulțumesc, doamna președintă. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner. We are talking about consolidating our common defense. Unfortunately, we have spoken not enough about peace. The President von der Leyen again has left the room after stating her opinion. She's not interested in finding out our point of view as Parliament. We have to fight for peace as well. This is what European citizens want from us. My country invests 2.5% of our budget to defense. Unfortunately, it does not receive the same treatment as the other member states who invest less in defense. Austria, for instance, is the best example. Romania is discriminated against when it comes to farmers, to Schengen. And we are now talking about boosting defense. In order to be able to boost defense and fight for peace, we need to impose this diplomatically. We haven't reached very good results. It can be a good idea to have a commissioner for peace, but what is to be done now? People are getting poorer and dying in the front line. We can't find a peace solution.
Speaker is Ladislav Ilčić, please.
Poštovani francuski liberali, nemojte kriviti Sjedinjene Američke Države za loše vojno stanje europskih.
We do not need to follow the French liberals here. Your liberal government has not matched the funding requested by the US. We hear that the EU is a moral pioneer. We like to preach to others around the world, but what credibility do we have? We are growing ever weaker. We're calling on others around the world to take a leaf from our book. We don't have the right political, migratory policies. We haven't taken the right political decisions. We need healthy families, a healthy economy, freedom. Not a society based on the type of values socialists champion. We need to cooperate with NATO and other like-minded allies, allies that share our civilization.
Aguilar, please.
Gracias, Presidenta. Comisión.
Thank you, President Commission. The comments by President Ursula von der Leyen saying that the EU is maturing towards a relevant political player with a security and defence policy, and the possibility of a commission for the defence union, but all of that will be incomplete if we don't overcome the internal contradictions that arise when it comes to taking our own decisions. It needs to be done overcoming the criticism of double standards. We are united defending Russia against the brutal aggression of Putin. At the same time, we need to do the same thing in the Mediterranean, where we see the Israeli aggression against Gaza, demanding not only a ceasefire with a single voice, but also ensuring that the International Court of Justice's rulings be observed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now the floor goes to Andrei Novakov.
Thank you, President. In 2023, Eurobarometer had a survey. 8 out of 10 European citizens want more defense money. 8 out of 10 want common public procurement for defense equipment. 8 out of 10 want coordinated action so that we can defend ourselves. We haven't failed to notice that this is 2023. In 2024, the world is not a safer place. The signal is quite clear. Everyone in Europe wants coordinated efforts to defend ourselves. How can we do that? By earmarking more money, build infrastructure that provides military mobility. We cannot defend ourselves while our equipment is stuck in bottlenecks, like is the situation with trucks. This cannot go on. We have to build a 10T network to allow free movement in peaceful times of people and goods. But when we have to defend ourselves of military equipment as well, this has to be a priority. People need to see that Europe is behind them in these hard times. Thank you.
Kostas Mavridis.
Thank you, Madam President. I applaud the Commission's President's initial apologetic statement that illusions have been shattered. And in fact, it is our moral duty to defend a sovereign country, such as Ukraine, being the victim of Russian aggression. But illusions are still prevailing. Here are some examples. We can't have strategic autonomy with increasing dependency of our food supply on sources outside of the EU. We can have internal security with a socially divided EU that doesn't prioritize the concerns and needs of its own citizens. And by the way, European sovereignty is already violated by the illegal occupation of the Republic of Cyprus, and this is EU soil for which matter the Commission's President remains silent. Finally, to accomplish our economic, social and environmental goals, we need common defence and security, and that is a proof that we care about EU in total.
Thank you very much. I will give the floor now to Stislav Krasnodębski, please.
Dziękuję, Pani Przewodnicząca.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to say that in the light of what the President of the Commission says, it is not clear why the Commission postpones the European defence industry strategy. I'd like to ask why. Is it proof of our internal weakness? It is incompatible with the necessity to act swiftly. So I'd like to hear a clarification on this.
Very much. Our next speaker is Dominic Ruiz.
Muchas gracias, querida presidenta.
Thank you, dear President Evelyn Regner. I'd like to take this opportunity in our debate on European security and defence policy to add a specific proposal to those which you've already heard. Nacho Sanchez Amor and Josep Borrell have already launched a proposal for a diplomatic academy in Europe. I believe we need a European military academy to update and draw upon the European Security and Defence College work. We need this to be a standing body to train officials from all member states as a prior step to participation in our rapid deployment capacity for external action and common security action with a truly European dimension, with an esprit de corps, personal connections that would strengthen that basis before participation in missions.
The next speaker on my list is Lukasz Kohut.
Unia to nie tylko dotacje.
Union is not only subsidies and funds, it's also a community of values which must be based on common defense policy. Putin is shedding blood of innocent people every day, and it is real that Trump will win in the US. So we are running out of time. We have to prepare for the worst. We have to fight the populists. Szydło, Saryusz-Wolski, they were all voting against defense cooperation in Europe. But now their voice is not important. We have a chance to reform the EU because Poland is back in the game. And the EU rapid response forces, the common development of defense sector and air shield for Europe. This is our chance, but we have to be ready for each and every scenario. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll give the floor to Sean Kelly.
Ireland is a neutral country, but neutrality doesn't make you immune to modern phenomena such as terrorist attacks, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, political interference. An example was when our HSE was attacked, a cyber attack a year or two ago, doing significant damage to our health services. Also, Ireland hosts in its territorial waters thousands of energy pipelines and subsea cables which are vital for not just Ireland but the European economy. Russian forces were seen to be observing and monitoring and mapping these some time ago, but our defence forces are underinvested in and are incapable of responding. We need to work with our European partners and invest more in particularly our defence forces so that they can at least monitor and help defend us from these types of attacks.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Josas Olekas, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, colleagues. I would like to congratulate Sweden for joining the NATO. I would like to respond to those in the left and the right. The peace can be established, but we need one condition. Aggressor Putin has to withdraw his military forces from Ukraine. And before it happens, we need to defend, we need to support Ukraine in weapons, the weapons that it needs. And we have to ensure solidarity. We have already dedicated 700 billion euros. However, only 50 billion euros for Ukraine. We have to strengthen European defense industry, but this is not enough. We have to strengthen the EU borders, that border with Putin's aggression. We need defense barriers rather than fences, and we need European funds for that, for the aggressor Putin to be dissuaded from checking our readiness.
Very much. And with this speaker, we finish our list of participants in the Catch the Eye procedure. We're going back to the rapporteurs, and I will give the floor to David McAllister, please.
Sehr verehrte Frau Präsidentin.
President, honourable members, dear colleagues, I would like to thank you all for this open and constructive debate. This morning, we didn't just talk about security and defence policy, but also the Parliament annual report on implementing the common foreign and security policy and Mr. Mixer's report on the security and defence policy. I listened very carefully for the last 2 hours, and I note broad consensus in this House across party lines. The consensus is that our common foreign and security policy, security and defence policy, must be further bolstered. It is true that there were exceptions, the representatives from the far left and the far right. This report is the last in the current Parliament, and it is my wish that my report and Mr. Mixer's report be viewed as a guideline for the new incoming Commission, the Commission President and the new High Representative, Vice President of the Commission. One thing is clear. We are experiencing a geopolitical paradigm shift, and it is more important than ever that the European Union does what Mr. Juncker once called for, ensures that it is a real global player. Up to the challenges of the modern world, I would like to thank all those present in this chamber for their input into the debate. I'd like to thank the shadow rapporteurs, the Commission Vice President and Mr. Šefčovič in particular for staying here with us for the full 2 hours of our debate this morning. And I would underline what Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said on security and defence policy. We must finally start taking tangible steps forward. Thank you very much.
I'll give the floor to the co-rapporteur, Sven Mikser, please.
President, Vice President of the Commission, representative of the Council, colleagues, I will not repeat what I said during my initial remarks. Let me just say that it has been a very constructive debate, and I believe it has further underscored the need for a more confident and more militarily capable European Union. The CSDP implementation report and also the CFSP implementation report that we are going to be voting on later today, I believe lay out a good and credible path towards that more capable and more confident European Union. And it's been aiming at a moving target, and it will continue to be aiming at a moving target, but we will have to continue adjusting our sights and making the effort. And I would like to finally thank all the colleagues, especially the shadow rapporteurs, as well as the staff, the assistants, and the advisors who have contributed to putting together this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the both rapporteurs. And now the floor is to the Vice President of the Commission, Maroš Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Dear State Secretary, honourable members of the European Parliament. At first, I really would like to thank you for this very important debate, which all political leaders of the groups and most of the honourable members clearly called a milestone. You would recall that a few years ago, talking about the European sovereignty, strategic autonomy, or European defence was very difficult in Brussels, but also in this House. But it's quite clear that two wars close to our borders, energy crisis and rough geopolitics, which are shaking the international post-Second World War order and security architecture, galvanized the European response. And I would like to reassure all of you that we in the European Commission hear you loud and clear, and we respect your calls for urgent action. Madame Ayer was referring to the European miracle of peace. And it's clear to all of us that this miracle must be defended now. Madame Reitke was rightly underlining that united Europe is more secure Europe. Therefore, I appreciate the overwhelming support for strategic autonomy and common procurement. And we know that common procurement or common purchase, that they work. After common purchase of vaccines, we have incredible results for common purchase of gas, including the latest round concluded yesterday. And it clearly demonstrates that if the European Union acts together and uses its political weight and economic strength, we always get excellent results. Because the world listens and business acts. And I'm sure that we will succeed with this approach also in the area of defence. I would like to thank both rapporteurs, Mr. McAllister and Mr. Mixer, for their important reports on CFSP and CSDP. And I would like also to reassure all of you that all your interventions regarding unwavering support for Ukraine, importance of complementarity of our actions with NATO, creating conducive environment for financing and investment for defence sector, calls for better interoperability, increase of production capacity and more coordination will be properly reflected in our proposals on the EU defence industrial strategy and investment programmes which we will table next week. As you probably heard me saying in different settings, I am convinced that European unity is our most precious currency. So let's use it wisely and again to build Europe which would be even stronger, more secure and ready for this new insecure world. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Vice President. And finally, the floor goes to the Council, to State Secretary Mathieu Michel, please.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Commissioner. Honourable members, allow me to thank you for your long-standing support to the EU's common security and defence policy. Today's debate illustrates the importance of staying united and firm in supporting Ukraine with the tools to defend itself. In the European Council of 14 and 15 December, EU leaders stressed the importance of timely, predictable and sustainable military support for Ukraine, notably through the European Peace Facility and the EU Military Assistance Mission, as well as through direct bilateral assistance by Member States. At the Special European Council of 1st February, EU leaders gave a clear tasking to the Council to reach agreement on the Ukraine Assistance Fund by early March 2024. Work is currently ongoing in the Council. The European Union has stood by Ukraine and for peace since day one, and we will remain steadfast in our support until Ukraine prevails against Russia's aggression. It is important to strengthen the defence industry sector and to work jointly to better create synergies in the defence production. In this sense, we are taking concrete steps. The conclusions of the December European Council called for the swift presentation of the European Defence Industrial Strategy. The Commission, together with the High Representative, should represent this strategy very shortly. The aim of the strategy is to strengthen the European defence technology industrial base in the broad sense. The issues of access to raw materials and critical technologies, harmful dependencies and security of supply are part of this discussion. Its aim, however, is not to build a protectionist industry. Its aim is to build a competitive industrial base that will help support and address Member States and allies' requirements. The strategy will offer a framework and vision for the next years. It will not in itself be a legal or regulatory instrument. Besides, the European Council has also called on the Commission to present a proposal for a European Defence Investment Programme, or EDIP. EDIP was announced in the joint communication on defence investment gaps. EDIP would be an industrial programme building on EDIRPA, ASAP and possible other elements. The EDIP regulation could serve as the anchor for future joint development and procurement projects of high common interest at EU level. If we want to be a geopolitical player in an increasingly dangerous world, we need to have the means to defend ourselves, but also the capacity to respond to challenges and emerging conflicts in other parts of the world, be it in Africa, the Middle East, or even the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Secretary Michel. Thanks, Vice President Šefčovič. Thanks to the rapporteurs, David McAllister and Sven Mikser, and of course to everybody who participated in the debate. The debate is closed now. The vote will be held today. And as we were very disciplined concerning time, the sitting is suspended right now for a few moments. It will resume at 11:30 with the address by Yulia Navalnaya.